Let's toggle over to IntelliJ. Now, as you can see, our Spring Boot server-side application is on. Right here, it's on. Let's do some testing. A very simple way to test this find an artifact by ID API endpoint is to just use your Google Chrome browser or any browser. So let's try it. Let's create a new tab. And we're going to type the API endpoint URL here. Localhost 8080. This time you have to use localhost 8080 because we're now the client. We have to specify the host and the port. /API/version1 artifacts. And then we're going to put a path parameter. That is the ID of an artifact. I have already copied the ID of Resurrection Stone, the last one. Okay. Now let me press enter. And there we go. We have flag is true, code is 200, message, data, and so on and so forth. You can also press F12 and click network. So this time, let me do it again. Press enter. Click here. This is the response. Okay, so either way. However, the browser's address bar can only make HTTP GET request. So you can use this to test find all artifacts or find an artifact by ID. You cannot test HTTP POST, PUT, or DELETE request. That means we need a more professional API testing tool. Let me introduce Postman. Postman is a collaboration platform for API development. We will use Postman as the API testing tool. Let's test find an artifact by ID. First, let's create a collection. And think of the collection as a package where you can define multiple API endpoints requests in it. And let's call this collection Hogwarts Artifacts Online. We're going to use this collection to store all the API endpoint requests. Okay, let's add a request to this collection. And the first one is called find an artifact by ID. And the URL is, let me copy and paste. We don't have to use HTTP, just localhost is fine. And this is a GET, but you can pick POST, PUT, and other HTTP methods. Okay, let's click send. All right, as you can see, not only it shows the response body, but it also has it well formatted. It's got pretty. The owner is null because this artifact is not owned by any wizard. Okay, so far so good. However, there is a bug in our current implementation. All right, so let's try to get a different artifact. For example, number 1, which is the deluminator. We're supposed to see the deluminator and also Albus Dumbledore as owner. Click send. Postman could not get a response. We got an error. Now let's go back to IntelliJ. And if you scroll down, we got a Stack Overflow error on the server side. And if you keep going, it's going on forever. But there's some problem about com. fastxml.json. Does this ring a bell? Yes, JSON is the hero behind Spring Boot that helps us convert the result object to a JSON object or JSON string before Spring Boot sends the response back to the client. So it looks like JSON is complaining. Why do we get this error? It looks like if an artifact does not have any owner, there's no problem. But once this artifact has an owner, then find artifact by ID will throw Stack Overflow problem. Let's go back to the slides. Here is the sequence diagram. The problem is caused by the bidirectional relationship between artifact and wizard. As we know, artifact has an owner. For example, in this case, invisibility cloak has an owner, Harry Potter. On the other hand, an owner has many artifacts. And in our example, Harry also has a second artifact, the Marauder's map. And in future, Harry may own more artifacts. That's the problem. When JSON, which is the JSON library used by Spring Boot, tries to serialize this found artifact into a JSON string, it gets stuck into an infinite loop. Here's what I mean. For ID, name, description, image URL, that's fine. JSON can serialize them into JSON string with no problem. And then JSON finds the field owner and tries to serialize the owner of this artifact. No problem. For ID and name, JSON can handle it very well. Just serialize them into JSON string. But then JSON will find a field in this wizard object called artifacts, and will keep trying to serialize each artifact. As you can see, JSON gets stuck into this infinite artifact wizard loop. Serialize artifact, it will serialize owner. Serialize owner, it will serialize the artifact's field in the wizard, and goes back to the artifact, and back and forth, back and forth. Finally, we got this Stack Overflow error. It would never stop. This is a very common problem called JSON Infinite Recursion in one-to-many relationship. There are many ways to solve this problem. Here's one. We will use an intermediate object called Data Transfer Object, or DTO, to solve this JSON Infinite Recursion problem. This DTO can help us define the information the server side wants to return to the client. We are using Java records to implement DTOs. Java records were introduced with the intention to be used as a fast way to create data carrier classes. There's no business logic, just a data holder or container. So this is the basic idea. Instead of returning the found artifact directly to the client, we will convert both the found artifact and its owner wizard to DTOs. As you can see, the artifact DTO is pretty similar to the artifact, but the artifact DTO is associated to wizard DTO. Wizard DTO has ID and name, but wizard DTO does not have a field called artifacts. Instead, it has a third field called number of artifacts, for example, equal to 5. Now in this case, if JSON is trying to serialize artifact DTO, it can serialize ID, name, description, image URL, that's fine. It goes to the owner wizard DTO, that's fine. Serialize ID, name, number of artifacts, and it stops there. Because wizard DTO is not referring back to any artifact DTO. This is how we prevent the JSON Infinite Recursion problem. So the controller will return the artifact DTO to the client, not the artifact. Another benefit of DTO is that we can define some extra fields in it. For example, in this case, the wizard class doesn't have a field called number of artifacts, but we can add one in its DTO. Next, let's implement this diagram. Let's turn off the project. Okay, let's create a DTO for artifact and a DTO for wizard. Right-click artifact, package, new a package called DTO. Then right-click DTO package, new a Java class. Let's call it artifact DTO. Let's create one for wizard as well. As I said before, we're using Java records to implement the two DTOs. So let's change this class to record. A Java record consists of a name, for example, wizard DTO, and a list of records fields, which in this example would be integer ID, string name, and integer number of artifacts. Let me properly format them. So we're done with defining the wizard DTO record. Next, let's move on to artifact DTO. For artifact DTO, here are the fields: string ID, string name, string description, string image URL, and a wizard DTO called owner. So let me properly format it. It's okay to write them in one line, but that makes it hard to read. So I like to break them into different lines, one field per line. Artifact will not be converted to artifact DTO automatically. We as developers have to provide converters. Next, let's create a converter that converts artifact to artifact DTO. And then we will create a converter that converts wizard to wizard DTO. First, for artifact, right-click artifact package, new a package. Let's call it converter. And then right-click converter, new a class. And let's call this artifact to artifact DTO converter. Enter. Let's also create one for wizard. Wizard to wizard DTO converter. Let's start with implementing the wizard to wizard DTO converter because it's easier. The Spring framework provides an interface called converter. So let's have our class implement this converter interface. Converter. This converter interface takes two generics. The first generic is the type of the source, in this case, wizard. The second generic is the type of the target, in this case, wizard DTO. As you can see, it's still not happy because we need to implement the method defined in this converter interface. We only need to implement the first one, convert. So, given a wizard, how do we convert it to wizard DTO? It's pretty simple. Let's first create an instance of wizard DTO. And remember, wizard DTO is a record. So we have to pass ID, name, number of artifacts to the constructor of this record. Okay, so where do I get the ID? It's from the source, source.getID. Then what about name? It's also from the source, source.getName. Then what about the last one, number of artifacts? Well, here you could write src.getArtifacts.size. No problem, you get the right solution. However, based on an object-oriented programming design principle called information expert, the responsibility of calculating the number of artifacts should belong to the wizard class, not this wizard to wizard DTO converter. In other words, if you write something like this converter knows too much about the internal workings of the wizard. This also violates something called law of Demeter, or principle of least knowledge. So let's refactor it. The converter should just call dot get number of artifacts. Now this method does not exist yet, so let's create this method in wizard class. Okay, here there's only one line. Return this dot artifacts dot size. We don't have to worry about the null pointer exception because here artifacts has already been initialized to an empty array. Okay, and then don't forget to return this wizard DTO. We're done with this converter. Let's move on to artifact DTO converter. So this class implements converter, and the first generic type is artifact. The second one is artifact DTO. Let's implement the convert method. Next, let's convert an artifact to artifact DTO. But first, let's create an instance of artifact DTO. So the ID is from the source.getID. And the name is from source.getName. Those should be simple. And description is source.getDescription. Image URL is source.getImageURL. The tricky part is the last one, owner. How do I get a wizard DTO? We know that the artifact, the source, has an owner. We need to convert this owner to wizard DTO. Who can help us? We just implemented the wizard to wizard DTO converter. So this converter can rely on that converter to convert owner to wizard DTO. Okay, so let's inject the wizard to wizard DTO converter into this class. Private final wizard to wizard DTO converter. And then we can use constructor to inject this converter into this class. Okay. But remember, if you want to take advantage of the Spring Framework's dependency injection, you must let Spring take care of the two converters. And how to do that? Let's make the two converter classes a component. This is similar to the DB data initializer. So by annotating this class as a component, Spring will kick in and manage the lifecycle of this converter. And if this converter needs another converter that is also managed by Spring, then we can use dependency injection. So we have to make both converters a component. Then let's go over to wizard DTO converter and also annotate using add component. All right. Now we can use the wizard to wizard DTO converter inside the artifact to artifact DTO converter. Wow, that's a mouthful. There is another trick here, is that if the owner is null, because we know it is possible that an artifact has no owner. So if the owner is null, we should just return null. We should not pass it to the wizard to wizard DTO converter, because that converter will not accept null wizard. Okay. So here we should have a ternary operator that is source.getOwner is not null. If so, this dot wizard to wizard DTO converter can take it. Get owner. It becomes kind of ugly here. If not, just return null. Okay, so let me properly format this. Feel free to pause the video and make sure you understand this part. It's a little bit complex here. And then don't forget to return the artifact DTO. Okay. The very last step, let's go to the artifact controller. We're almost there. So here, if you look at line 22, apparently we cannot return this found artifact directly to the client side. So before that, we have to convert it to DTO. So that means this controller will use the service provided by the artifact to artifact DTO converter. So let's inject it in. Private final artifact to artifact DTO converter. Okay. And we're going to use constructor to inject. Of course, you can modify this constructor, but I'm pretty lazy, so let me delete those and let IntelliJ recreate for me. Select both and click OK. All right. Okay. Then let's refactor this method. So after line 25, let's convert the found artifact into artifact DTO. So here we have artifact DTO, just call it artifact DTO. Assignment operator, this dot artifact to artifact DTO converter dot convert found artifact. And then we're going to package this DTO as the data, the payload of the response instead of this found artifact, as you can see here. And that's it. This will fix the JSON Infinite Recursion problem. But first of all, let's make sure that introducing this refactoring, these two converters and the two DTOs, will not mess up our current test. So let's go here, go to test, and let's run the tests in here. Right click and run tests in this package. Okay, so it seems like the refactoring, the new stuff we added in didn't mess up the current tests. This is really a peace of mind. Now let's launch it. Let's go here, make sure you select this main application class and run. Okay, so now the Spring Boot is starting at port 8080. Let's toggle over to Postman. Okay, so here. This time, let's do it again. We're requesting Deluminator, and we really want to see Dumbledore that has number of artifacts equal to 2. So click send. Oh yeah, so we did it. As you can see, this artifact has ID, name, description, image URL, and owner. And this owner has ID, name, and number of artifacts. Well, to be more specific, this is really the artifact DTO, and this owner here is really the wizard DTO. We're not sending the artifact and the wizard back, but we're sending a data transfer object. So now we're done with the first API endpoint, find an artifact by ID. So let's go to GitHub issues. We just finished the API endpoint, which corresponds to this user story. So let's select it and check it off from this to-do task list. Next, let's work on the first user story. As an anonymous user, I want to find all artifacts so that I can learn the details of every artifact. I will see you in the next video.